I'm going to be kind of watching the chat with a lot of help. Rez, Courtney, Maya, Scott, Donna, Christina, who did I miss? I think Judy's in the background somewhere. We've got lots of folks helping out. We've got a lot of schools in the group today that have done distance learning before. If you joined us on Friday, Intercoast College and Escoffier and My Computer Career really contributed to that session that Maya led on Friday afternoon, which was really, really well attended and well received. We had a lot of good feedback from it. We're going to be continuing today. Everybody's invited to contribute, and we're going to do some breakouts today for fun as well. Rez is our host with the most, and we'll be keeping an eye on the shop for us. If you need something, yell Rez really loudly or type it into the chat board in bold, and Rez will come to your rescue, I'm sure. With that, we're going to get started. We are going to, Zoom has one weakness, at least with the version we're using. It doesn't save uploads in the file chat for people that are logging in later. They don't see the uploads. So Rez is going to upload these documents as we go on, as well as the other staff. They'll upload these for you. And we have some handouts we'll go over. And in any case, if for any reason you're missing a handout after we adjourn, just drop one of us an email message and we'll shoot it over to you by email. No big deal. All right, so let's start. I believe everybody can see my screen. I'm just looking for the chat board here. And just a quick thumbs up if you can see my screen. Got a thumbs up from everybody? You're seeing the webinar outline for today?
Yep, we're good.
All good? Excellent, thanks Rez. We've got an hour and a half scheduled. It might go a little longer, depends on the pace. What I'm going to try to do is not speed things up unduly. If we have questions, we'll try to answer them and use kind of an overflow time if we need to go over. But that said, we're going to try to keep on schedule if we possibly can. So here's a quick recap of where we've been. This journey kind of started, well, depending which journey we're talking about, we've all been on since mid-February, early March for a lot of us. By mid-March, things were shut down. March 20th, we did a kickoff webinar, kind of a back to basics that Mary Clara, Maya, Courtney, and Christina, Rez handled, talking about where you were today, that day, what you had to worry about right away, decisions about going distance learning over the longer haul. We followed that up on April 13th with a town hall meeting. We did two of those actually, one for the language schools and one for everybody else. We had about 175 people total in those two webinars, where we identified key areas of concern that you were facing, either worries about what you're doing today, what you want to do tomorrow, what the rules were. So we spent quite a bit of time on that. And part of that, we identified items that you wanted us to pay some particular attention to. Friday afternoon, under Maya's leadership, we spent 2 hours actually going through the essentials, things you needed to know before the teaching and learning began. So we talked about faculty training, student orientation, admissions kinds of issues, and there were handouts with that. We had a panel of folks from Intercoast Escoffier and My Computer Career, some great handouts. And again, if you missed those, we can email them to you. Just drop us a note. Send it to me, or any of your favorite staff members can get that to you. And those will be posted on the blog, on the website. We also, if we didn't start recording it, Rez, if you don't mind doing that, I don't have that control.
Yep, it's done.
Good, thanks a lot, Rez. And we did record the Friday webinars, and those will be posted here in the next day or two on the blog as well, which is on the homepage under Judy's blog. Today we're going to focus on assessment, attendance, and heavily on instructional methodology focused on distance learning. And then Friday at 3:30, we're going to actually do the walkthrough of the streamlined IDL application. That is based fully on document 3.1, I'm sorry, document 3.IDL and document 25.IDL. We are going to be using exactly those files, those documents for the streamlined, except cutting things out. And we'll be cutting them out by telling you what questions you don't have to answer and giving you a template for that. And we'll be doing that. It'll be done in AMS as soon as it's live, which is hopefully by the end of the week. Either way, we're going to walk through that process on Friday from 3:30 to 5, or as long as it takes. All right, so you don't need to worry about it. It's coming. But if you want to see what 3.IDL looks like, you can go to the website and see it. That's the full version. And document 25.IDL, the combination of those things will comprise the bones of the streamlined application. That's where we are. Okay. To the gang, to the ACCET staff, and I've got a lot of support here today. I'm kind of focusing on the agenda, so if you see a question that pops up that that can't be answered quickly in chat by one of you, just shout it out to me so I can jump on it. All right, that'd be great. We've rehearsed this this dance several times now the last month, but always want to be sure we know what each of us is doing when we can't see each other. The handouts right here you see on screen, these are available to you. We're going to be posting them as the afternoon goes on, but those are also available for us to email to you, and they'll be posted as well on the website early next week. We're happy to email them to you after the webinar today if you drop us a message. But as you can see, they're being uploaded in real time. Rez is taking care of that for us. We got a full outline of today's meeting. We've got some notes on tracking attendance, a comparison chart for sync and asynchronous learning, a sample syllabus template we'll be talking about shortly, a sample grading rubric for grading for online and discussion forums, some PowerPoints with some of your favorites like Bloom's taxonomy, some definitions of formative summative assessment, and a definition of authentic assessment. Those are handouts we have for you, and those will be posted as the time goes on. Okay, with that, let's talk about some basics for a few minutes. Common question is, when is a distance learning student considered to be a start? Now, if students are in a hybrid format, which nobody is right now, at least for another week or two, depending again on where you're located, a distance learning student is considered a start when academic work has been completed. Now, if you've been to one of the accreditation workshops in the last few years, we talk about this as part of the refund policy, document 31. We talk at great length about what a start is and when a student starts, because you have to be able to track who is owed a refund under a cancellation policy or a withdrawal policy. So that's where this song and dance usually falls. But for today, it's quite simple. Academic work completed. This is also supported by the Department of Education guidelines. A login to your system or watching a video does not constitute academic work completed. Okay, so you have to think in terms of quizzes, homeworks, is that a word? Quizzes, homework, exams, participation in discussion forum, something typically that's done in some interactive way that's ordinarily done for a grade. Okay, so that would be academic work. Those are examples. If you have other questions, drop them into the chat board. We'll give you some feedback on it. A simple login or passive activity does not count. Similarly, the common question, what constitutes the last day of attendance? Again, if it's in a hybrid situation, it would be the last day attended physically or the last day of academic work completed if it's online. So either one, whatever is the latter, can be the last day of attendance, okay? Last date that academic work was completed and something you can demonstrate happened. Any questions about first starting when a student is considered a start for refund purposes or last day of attendance? Questions about that? Looks like not. All clear. You all guys all know the drill. So far so good. A quick question about externships or quick coverage of that. This was covered under the temporary flexibilities that were published just about the 15th or so. It's on the website. It talks about what happens with externships now, where students are either going on leaves of absence or schools are using capstone courses instead, and that's been accepted by ACCET during this emergency time period. We don't know exactly when that emergency time period will end, but right now those alternatives to externships are okay. There's some similar guidance in that same document. Again, you can get it in Judy's blog relative to clinicals. And the commission has been pretty flexible about that. We don't know when normal returns, but when it's back to normal, if you're doing online now and you ordinarily have externships and clinicals, the expectation that you'll be returning to these approvals for replacements for clinicals or substitutions for clinicals and externships are on a temporary basis only. Okay? Great. Let's move on. There's a link there as well to Judy's blog with that guidance. You can see where my mouse is hovering. And again, when you download this, you can click and takes it right to that document. Some really good detail about the externship and the clinical flexibilities. So far, so good. Moving on, we're doing great. We're flying right through this. Okay.
John.
Yes,
John,
Donna, jump
yes,
in, Donna.
can you give a brief description for one of our participants of a capstone?
A capstone, sure. A course that's going to replace an externship, so something is high level. So again, I imagine a number of you are doing this and could type something into the chat board for us. That would be great. But it's going to have to somehow simulate the skill set that students were learning on the externship. Obviously, they're not going to be doing the exact real work in exactly the same way, but you're going to have to design something that covers those objectives, things that the students would have been expected to learn as part of their externship. You're going to recover in a capstone course. Donna, do you want to add anything to that? I know that was a really general, off-the-cuff explanation.
No, I think that's great because it is a skill set that is replacing. There are people online that are using it that could type something in, and but it's a pretty high level. It includes lecture and lab work that is comparable to what would be covered in the externship.
We're going to be talking about formative and summative assessments here very shortly, but would you consider a capstone course formative or summative assessment? Anybody can type into that. There's another question from Liz. Summative for sure, David. Yeah, I would consider that summative. It's got to be pulling a lot of stuff together, right? Showing a demonstration of learning. Does someone want to answer Liz's question for me? Just attending a live discussion might not be enough because you don't know if the student is sleeping, okay? So that's why a passive lecture, a student sitting somewhere, is not considered academic work completed. Now, if that is an interactive where you're calling on students and students are responding, I would say that that changes, Liz. It's a good question. Any other comments about Liz's question? Good, Liz seems happy. All right, everybody else wants to comment on that. That's good. Ordinarily, they'd be submitting something, but David, I think if it's interactive, we talked about discussion forums being adequate to prove academic work completed because you're often grading that, and we'll do some rubrics here later today, and students are actively participating in that. That would be considered academic work completed. But something where students are just passive, this comes out of straw students. It wasn't all that long ago. And it's probably still happening where students are being enrolled just long enough to collect money without anything but other than having logged in, maybe downloaded some stuff. So the department expects that there's a demonstration of work completed. Okay, I'm going to flip over to and show you a sample of a syllabus template. Rez, has that been uploaded yet? If not, would you mind? Oh, there it is right there. Great. Why don't you take a look at that very quickly? I'm going to try to do the same. I realize I don't have that up on my screen either. So I'm going to download that very quickly. Let's see if I can get that opened up. So let me pull it from here. I have so many windows open, I can't count them. Pull this up really quickly. Here we go. I'm going to stop the screen share for a second and bring this up. I just wanted to show this to you as a template. I'm sure you all at this point in time have, oops, something just happened. Try it again. There we go. That should be in view now. This is just a skin, just a skeleton of a syllabus template. And the reason I wanted to show this to you, just in case you're either designing a course from scratch or designing lesson plans, this is a really good exercise for faculty that are either designing a lesson plan from scratch or adapting one for online delivery. This was designed for a full course, but it can be drilled down into a single day lesson plan or single week unit in distance learning kind of verbiage. But it includes all the things you kind of want to see. This is not an official document. Again, I repeat, not an official document, just kind of a best practice document that I've used over the years and got some feedback on it, including the course description, attendance and participation requirements, the basic course description, things like that, readings and resources. But it lays out all the tools in an online environment. typically these things are posted in Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard or whatever you're using in specific spots. The other thing that this typically includes is how the grades are weighted. That's a specific ACCET requirement for everybody anyway under standard 8A. How are these things weighted? It talks about grading rubrics when they exist. We're big fans here at ACCET of grading rubrics. Common weakness for IDL site reviews where their students are being graded willy-nilly by faculty for all kinds of different reasons, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. Someone gets a 10 for showing up, someone else gets a 5 for, again, submitting anything. You just want to have some consistency in training. So grading rubrics are pretty important to your consistency and quality. This next part talks about mapping, identifying exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish in that lesson, what students will be able to do when that lesson is completed, how the unit will contribute to that, key concepts, how you're going to cover them in reading, assignments, homework, discussions, quizzes. In this mapping term I'm going to talk about here again in a minute. But often what doesn't happen is that it hasn't been thought through. And here's a common weakness. Let me go back. I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to the outline. A little bit better spot to work from. And hopefully you're seeing my agenda for today saying instructional design.
Yep.
Good, thanks. We are so dependent, or we've gotten so dependent on off-the-shelf course materials that I think we've moved a little bit too far away from thoughtfully reviewing what it is exactly what we expect our students to know at the end of each lesson. And this makes for a really good exercise as you're looking at faculty lesson plans. What exactly do the students need to be able to do by the end of the lesson, whether that's a 15-minute lesson or a 3-hour lesson or a week? And how do you know that they know what they need to know? And that has to do with course mapping from the competency you want to teach, what they expect to be able to, what they need to be able to do when they're on the job, and how do you assess for that? So the sample syllabus template, and again, you probably have something that's better or more suited to your particular environment. Anything works, but be as specific as possible. You've got to drill into these things very, very detailed. Think in terms of, like, if you were designing a competency-based course, what would ensure that everything that you need to cover is covered and mastered? Any questions on course mapping, what that means? Anybody from the audience that wants to add something to that? I'm not seeing the chat board here, so let me see if I can close some things up and see it. There, it finally came up. Okay. Course mapping, everybody's kind of clear on that, what it means? Perfect. I'm now going to slide over. We are bouncing around just to be sure everybody's talking about the same thing at the same time. I'd like to bring up a slide of Bloom's. Again, there are other course design methodologies. Everybody's got their own way of doing things. I'm a Bloom's fan because that's what I grew up with. So let's just talk about that for a moment. What I love about Bloom's, it starts with the basics down here with remembering. A lot of what students need to do in vocational programs that are getting them ready for, say, allied health, they need terminology, right? They need to know the basics. And the remembering part, we often refer to as drill and skill. This surface kind of learning, it's important. I'm not saying it's not essential, but it's typically boring. It's very hard to keep students' attention. You have to balance that with additional items that help students understand this material and apply it. And then, of course, going up Bloom's, and not all courses or lessons even attempt to go up the Bloom's taxonomy, these higher levels. Most are focused on remembering, understanding, and hopefully applying. As you're planning your lesson, it's important to know what you're trying to accomplish. Today, for example, we're really only working on remembering and understanding. What we're talking about today, remember some terms, Bloom's, remember Bloom's, remember mapping, remember formative and summative assessment. Those are the terms we'd like you to remember at the end of the day. We're going to apply it really briefly in a discussion, in a breakout session here shortly, but we're not going to be going up beyond that. If you know what it is you're trying to accomplish, it's easier to create activities that students will benefit from and learn from. Again, any comments from the gallery? My chat is not updating, so I don't know if there's nothing going on in there or not. Maybe not.
That's nothing right now, John.
Nothing going on.
We're keeping up
I'm so
with it.
crystal
Nope.
clear. I'm amazing even myself. So jump in if there's any questions, okay? Good deal. All right. That's a brief introduction to Bloom's. We're going to cycle back to that very soon. Anybody know what a learning object is? Anybody want to take a stab at defining a learning object? Linda's overwhelmed. Okay, Linda, that helps. It's me. Maybe I'm underwhelming. What is a learning object? Anybody want to take a stab at that? It comes from kind of e-learning and distance learning, but I think it's a good term to use other places. Anybody? An outcome is a piece of it. Learning object typically is short. In online learning, they're typically 10 to 15 minutes. You want to be able to demonstrate a skill, that the skills demonstration is part of it, or the assessment is a piece of it. That's the last piece. Anybody else? Take a stab at it. Yep, there's a reason. There's something we want to accomplish. Danitsa, if I pronounced that correctly. So both of you are correct so far, and there's one other piece in the middle. Yep, yep, exactly. Danny is fine. Thank you, Danny is good. All right. So it's the basic level. It is what we want to accomplish. It's some content that the students use to help learn about that, and it's an assessment. It's kind of those three things wrapped up together. And one of the important things in online learning is that you can't do a 3-hour learning object or people will be sleeping, all right? Typically learning objects are very short. So as you look at your lesson plan, you want short learning objects. Here's what we want to accomplish. Here's the content we need to cover so that you have a basic understanding of it, an activity that we're going to use to teach it, in some form of assessment. Without assessment, we don't know if the students learned it or not. Quiz, homework, essay, discussion forum. And yep, Tim just looked it up. Yeah, he got the link. Thanks, Tim, for pulling that down for me. I couldn't find the link here on the spot, but this is the definition. Actually, put that as a link in the syllabus for today. Smallest independent structural experience that contains an objective learning activity and an assessment. Really good thing to play around with at your next faculty meeting, your next Zoom meeting. Talk about learning objects. Okay. Next, I'm going to bounce around again now to grade weighting. Students need to know what to expect. When your students are fully distanced from you, you can't assume anything. Maya and team covered this quite a bit on Friday, talking about how to prepare the students, how do they know what to expect. Gita and Pamela both talked at length about setting up expectations, how you get students familiar with your network, and the folks from My Computer delved into that as well. Lots of information, lots of testing, lots of one-on-one with students. What's coming? How do I know what to do? How do I know when it's due? How do I know where to post it? How do I know who to go to for help? What if I have an academic question? What if I have a technical question? All these kinds of things have to be worried about. And one of them is how I'm being graded. Again, you're not there face-to-face all day long with them. So including that grade weighting for the course as part of the orientation or part of the syllabus for that particular course is a really important part of this. So often we weight grades based on something simple. 25, 25, 25, 25. Is that 425? Is that 100? I do 4 of them. Irrespective of whether they are equally important. Often we see class participation or attendance weighted at some high level that makes no sense. Should a student who, for showing up, earn 10% or 15% or 25% of their grade? Okay, you have to think about that. How much should quizzes be weighted? We talked in the town hall, there were some questions about quizzes, and I remember talking or joking a little bit about online testing. And in my experience, you have to assume if it's online that it's going to be open book. All right. It's I think a little dangerous to put everybody in the honor system and say, take this half-hour test and don't anybody look. You know, that's just not fair to anybody to do that. Assume it's open book. So if you're doing open book quizzes and testing, how much should those be weighted? Should that be 90% of the grade? 80%, 50% that like they might be in a face-to-face course? You know, what would be, let's get some ideas. What do you think quizzes and exams should be weighted in a course that's online? Here's the example of a fully online course. What would you suggest being a grade weighting for objective testing? Marco likes 30%. Because yeah, it says weighted against the learning objectives of course. DOE, I don't know who that is, but DOE, thank you. 30% seems to be a nice average that people like, 40%. So this can vary quite a bit. You have to weigh that with the other activities and homework that students are working on, whether these are drill and skill, whether it's a class project that's going to take a lot of time. Again, Ron is suggesting how to do some high stakes testing with a lockdown browser, which is another thing we use for high stakes testing. We're going to talk about that here again in a few minutes. But right now, I'm going to ask Rez to put us in rooms. Not quite yet, Rez. Let me set this up first. But Rez has magic, assigned everybody to one of 4 courses: anatomy, psychology 101, auto mechanics, or business administration. When he hits the button, one of our wonderful ACCET staff is going to go with you into these breakout rooms. And in your group of, oh, we only have 110 people here. So in your group of 25 or 30 people, we're going to spend 5 minutes. We're going to see how organized everybody is. And you guys are going to create a grade weighting for one of these courses, not for an individual assignment, but for the anatomy course. You're going to come up with a grade weighting that equals 100% in 5 minutes. You up to that? Ready? Set?
Ready.
Oh, by the way, you'll have to accept your invitation to the meeting room. Please accept. No one can just sit around and not go somewhere, okay? Just like your students.
Okay.
Under orders. Ready, set, go. I'm still showing 20 people in our main room, so everybody get going. No hangers arounders. We see who you are. Sarah, Penelope, Nick, Michelle. Get going, you guys. Eric, Damon, Alex, Angela. Down to 11. We still have some company here. Rez, is it okay to talk about people if they're not?
Well, especially if they refuse to go to the breakout room, so we can talk
So
about that.
they're refusing? Is that Eric, Sarah?
Well, there.
If you
There's
guys can
tea,
hear
coffee, cookies.
Yep. There, we got them moving. That got a few people going.
The smell of the fresh cookies.
We should, before we move to the next one, we can remind people that we can see who they are. That would be good.
That's right.
So those of you still here listening, it's okay. There's no secrets.
Damon, I can see you too. He's still sitting there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Barbara. People are multitasking, I'm sure.
There's 27 in each room. So.
Good. That's good. How much time do we have on the clock there, Rez?
3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Good. Good. We are right
And
on
we're
schedule, believe it or not. Exactly on
30
time.
minutes right now. Yep.
Good. I do wish we could kind of peek in and out, but you really can't do that, can you?
I can send you in there if you want.
Oh,
Which
that's
one do you
okay.
want to check? You good?
bounce around, then I have to wave my hand to get back out, or I can just come back, can't I? Why don't you pop me into one? Just give me like, pull me back out after 30 seconds and put me to the next one.
I can't do that. I
Okay.
have to, oh no, I can. Yeah, I can. Yes.
All
Let
right.
me put in one.
I know I can exit.
There you
I
go.
can leave. Let me leave when I want if you can. If not, don't worry about it.
Okay. Psychology 101.
All right.
Got the invite? Okay, they're all in breakout rooms right now. They'll be back in about 30 seconds. So if you're wondering where people are, they'll be back in about 30 seconds.
Thanks. I noticed your box at the top, so I'll just wait.
Do.
10 plus 10 for.
Oh,
Okay,
or
let's
not.
hope it does.
Wow.
And we're done. It's too short.
That was really fast.
Welcome back, everybody.
Thank you.
Again, you may have to turn off your video again after coming back out of the breakout. There you go. And we got about 107 people back again. Excellent, we're back where we started. So let's do a quick share out. Everybody's back, everybody can hear me? My video back going here, great. I know that wasn't much time. It was probably a little harder than you would have expected in 5 minutes with only 27 people in the room to fight with. Could our moderators just type a couple ideas in or just turn your audio on and maybe let's go around really quickly. Maybe that'd be simpler. Christina, do you want to start? What did you guys find real quick?
Sure. So anatomy class, we had a breakdown of quizzes, assignments, participation, homework, midterm, and final exam. And we determined that quizzes would be 15% total, assignments would be 10%, participation 5%, homework 5%, the midterm 25%, and the final at 40% of the grade. And I double checked the math, and good job, everybody. It adds up to 100%.
It adds up to 100, you're good. Christine, would you do me a favor, just type that into the chat board really quick?
Absolutely.
Good. And then why don't we try Mary Claire and Courtney next? With
Okay,
Psychology 101.
so we didn't really even end up with a full consensus yet, but here's what we had. Discussion board, 10%. Quizzes, 10%. Assignments, 10%. Midterm and final, 20% each. And a research project at 30%.
Is that up to where are our math wizards? Is that up to 100?
That's,
If not,
yeah,
budget?
that's 100.
Well done, Mary Claire and Courtney. If you don't mind just popping that into the chat board as well, that'd be great, Mary
Yep.
Claire and Courtney. And then Maya,
Yep.
you're up with auto mechanics.
Oh, sure. So we were having just some discussion whether we're running a credit hour or a clock hour class. So that took a bit of our time with our homework. So we'll say credit hour for purpose right now. We also did not come to a consensus on this because we ran out of time, but kind of our last iteration here, we had homework at 10%, discussion at 30%, quizzes at 15%, and class activities at 20%, and the final at 25%.
Great, good. Type that in. We're getting a nice mix here, aren't we? Scott, you're up with business administration.
Sure. So as I was saying to them, business admin for ACCET tends to be the admin assistant style business admin rather than thinking about an MBA. So we did a grade weighting for an Excel spreadsheet course. So we went very project-based. So for example, a project-based final at 30%, 4 assignments at 10% each that they would turn in, as well as 10% grade for homework, and then a midterm exam at 20%.
Excellent, great. Pop that in there, Scott.
Sure.
I just have some general kind of comments about this, and this is my bias. Again, you need to do what works for your content, your students, your faculty. One of the lessons learned, I did online learning for like 20 years and a lot of study during that time, is that reducing the weight of objective testing, unless you're preparing students for a specific test. So, you know, again, in any profession that's leading to some kind of credential where students are going to have to take a test at some point, you of course want to teach to that test very aggressively. But otherwise, think in terms of reducing your reliance on objective testing and increasing the weighting and the importance of homework, projects, discussion. Why would that be? Why do you think I think that way? Those of you who are mind readers.
Probably because they can internet search some of your test answers if they have enough time. So we want the more interactive learning to be the focal point.
I would think that that's absolutely true. I couldn't tell who was speaking, but thank you for that. Any other comments? Join in, please. I've seen critical thinking skills, make sure they're engaged, discussions, higher thinking in Bloom's world. Thanks, Mary Claire. Was that Mary Claire's? Yep. So the objective testing, when you look at what you're teaching your students to do, what you're preparing them for, is only going to get them so far. Now, again, I'm going to qualify that. In an anatomy and physiology class where there's so much vocabulary, I think that's a different thing, right? Again, there's other classes like that. Even auto mechanics 101, there's certain things, jargon, things that they have to know. You got to just drill in skill for that. Do they know this? Do they understand what I'm talking about? So we can move forward. But as you move along, reduce your reliance on the objective testing. You're going to get way more meaningful assessments. You're going to know way more about what your students know. And there's a term for that, for the skill sets your students need to know for the job. Anybody know what that is? It's sitting in. It was sitting on the syllabus, which is not on screen right now, but there's a term for that type of assessment. Who wants to take a stab at that? There's a term of art for it. Starts with an A. Close. Competency would be good, Ziad. Russ is uploading the sample syllabus again so you can have it. Let me go back to my screen share for you and I'll give it away here. So here's the answer right here. Authentic assessment. And I'm going to pull up the slide. Tell me if you see the slide deck when I pull that up. Did that come into view?
We see Bloom's.
Do you see authentic assessment there on the slide?
Yeah.
Good, excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
So mimics a real world task, typically assesses higher Bloom levels like Mary Claire said, measures practical and soft skills at once, more complex tasks, they require multiple stages. Okay, so those are the types of things that, again, depending on the content and where you're going, that you want your students to be developing. Whenever we talk about critical thinking skills, we're typically not developing critical skills in objective testing, all right? Typically not. This is why distance learning is so much work for faculty and for students. This is why it's hard for them to stay engaged. You're going to ask them to think, and a lot of this they're going to be doing on their own unless they have a hybrid approach. Another good reason why hybrids, when we're back to normal, whenever that is, that having a combination of hybrid and online has traditionally been considered the best model. I know it's not the only model, but for vocational students, you're probably going to have the best retention, the best success in a hybrid environment. Because it's hard for students to do these higher level tasks. Again, generalizing all over the place, but for vocational students in for-profit institutions typically struggle with these kinds of activities. And they typically will drop out at high rates when they feel overwhelmed. You've got to get students involved in learning to think a little bit independently, doing some work on their own, and rewarded for that with your grade weighting. Those were my suggestions on the grade weighting. So again, don't overweight those objective testing and maybe reduce it overall. Use it for quick skill and drill, quick pop quizzes, open book, so they get used to finding the material quickly, and then spend more of your time on the homework, things that take more thought. While we're on the subject, let's back up a slide to formative and summative assessments. Now, most of you know what these mean. I don't need to define these for you. But what we're doing today, obviously with the breakout rooms, and if we were to grade you on your grade weighting exercise, would that be a formative or summative assessment if we were going to grade you on your participation in the grade exercise, the grading exercise? Anybody? I've lost my chat board here. There it is. Got some talk about hybrids. Folks seem to like that. What is today's exercise? The grade weighting exercise that we did in the breakout. Was that formative or summative? Formative. Thanks, David. Yep, Linda, go with that. Okay. How would we integrate that into a summative assessment? Something that looks at the big picture. How would we do that? Ideas? You want to test the skill set of being able to create a grade weighting exercise that makes sense in distance learning. If that was one of your competencies of a course, you'd want to ask why and how to assess. What context might that be in? I'll give you one. Again, this is a great exercise to use in your next in-service. You'd create a syllabus, right? You'd be doing the course mapping exercise and carry it through all the way. How does that grade weighting make sense within the context of this course, or within this exercise, or within this unit of this course? And again, these things are fluid. They vary from a unit, a learning object, to a unit, to a lesson, to a course, to a program. Ultimately, these are mapped to program competencies. What will the students be able to do when they graduate? This is the fun about mapping. And David's idea of a capstone, which of course puts those things all together. A capstone is typically at the end of a program. It's testing competencies from the whole deal. Those are summative assessments: a high stakes exam, a big class project, major essay. Yep, very good, David. Thank you for that comment. All right, so again, this is just 101 formative versus summative assessment vocabulary that you and your faculty should be familiar with. What is this assessment doing? What am I testing? A small piece or a bigger piece? And is that small piece or bigger piece an authentic assessment or not? Okay, something that they'll use on the job, or something we just need to build as a building block, or is it just a waste of time? These are important questions. Let me go back over to the syllabus. Let's go back to assessments a little bit more, then we're going to go into another exercise here in a minute. We worry about student authentication. This is a requirement of document 3.IDL. It's a requirement of document 3.IDL because it's a requirement of the Department of Education. You're required by the department to have a policy, a procedure for ensuring the identity of your students. How do you do that in an online course? Let's throw some suggestions out there. Let's see if we can get 10 suggestions. 10 suggestions in 30 seconds. Ready, go. How do you know who they are, who they say they are? Unique password, there's one. Two-factor authentication, that helps. A camera, that'll help if you know what they look like, right? Marco's joining the compare work with prior submissions. camera, student idea, picture and camera, photo, 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 photo. Okay. Can you guess staff? Let's see how well the staff knows me. Okay, this is just for staff. Which of these answers do you think I like the best? Staff only. Staff only. Which is the one you think I like the best? Scott likes password. Scott. Staff, come on, staff. I'm not hearing the staff. Two-factor authentication. Courtney, not there yet. Courtney, keep going. Mary Claire's the login. No, you guys, you don't know me at all. No, there was one suggestion nobody said yet. Which one is it? Scrolling back up to it. I'll give credit where credit is due. It scrolled so fast I can't quite find it. Come on, it keeps moving. Hold still, hold still. Compare the work with prior submissions. David, thank you. That's the winner. Now, all your answers were fine, just so you know. All your answers were fine. But the only way you're really going to know who's doing the work, if you see consistency and growth. You don't see that in a login because the student could give the login to a friend. They could be working with a friend. You don't know who's actually doing the thinking or who's doing the homework, who's doing the testing. But as you get to know the students in their written work, their participation in discussion forums, in their project work, in their questions that you might pose to them separately or individually or in one-on-ones that some of you are doing, then that's the best way of knowing who's who. Okay, that's not the requirement for 3-point IDL. That's just a general statement. Joan, we're going to discuss accommodations for LD. Not today, Joan, not today. Thank you though, good question. A lot of the technology that's available widely has that kind of built in, but that's over our scope today, but a really good question. Okay, so you have to deal with student identity authentication, and as far as the streamlined application, having a user ID and password, believe it or not, is good enough. There was some talk earlier about exam proctoring. At some point, you're going to have some kind of a high stakes exam, project or otherwise. If you need to do that because you're required to do it, or your nursing board or somebody requires you to do it, how will you proctor that? Of course, there's the now and there's the back to normal piece, right? How about a little bit of the now and also a back to normal? What do you do when it's back to normal? Suggestions? How do you know? How do you proctor an exam that's really important? Do it on ground, Emily. Just bring it in-house, right? In normal times, have them come in and do it. Most of your distance learning students are fairly local. I think Intercoast talked about that on Friday. Most of your students, Gita and Kelly, what, 25 miles? Or within 25 minutes, was it? I forget what it was. They're all close to campus. Time the exam, that helps control it. Agreed with that. What else can you do with exams within your LMS? What can you do with exams? With questions? What can you do with exam questions and answers? You can shuffle them, scramble them, right? Randomize, exactly. You really should be doing randomization because even if it's an open book test, students will cheat when they can. And again, I'm painting a very broad brush, but colleges have done lots of testing. There's lots of research out there, and when given the opportunity to cheat, an awful lot of people will do it. By randomizing it, everybody's got their own, right? And they still at least have to do their own work. Randomize the test banks, randomize the question, and the question banks in Moodle and Canvas and Blackboard all handle that. So if you're not doing that, that's a good tool. Timing it is really useful as well. Again, back to Joan's question, timing it becomes problematic when students have learning plans or learning disabilities. You may have to make accommodations for that. And somebody talked about the on-camera lockdown with a webcam. So there are services that will do this for you. They're not terribly expensive. Ron, any idea the cost per person per exam? I know it varies with volume quite a bit. If anybody has an estimate for people that are thinking about this, throw it on in there. Or vendors that you've used, if you want to put it in the chat board, that'd be useful as well. About $5 a test, okay? Been a long time since I've looked at this. 25 for a sitting fee for somebody else. Respondus, there's a Proctorio, good. Okay, so there's lots of vendors you can take a look at. Be sure you save the chat, by the way, before you leave today. Just save that and you can take a look at these responses. Very good. Thank you guys for contributing to that. Excellent. On the slide deck, or not the slide deck, but the outline, there's a link here to a really good guide from Yale, which is kind of high end, but on formative and summative assessments is a really, really good table that you might find useful. And we also had a one on rubrics we would bring up later that Courtney had shared, and some other ones that we've got references to that as well online. Okay, you ready for the next formative assessment? You ready for this? Okay. This is going to be another 5-minute drill. It's like speed chess or speed dating, one of the two. It'll be the same groups. This time, we'd like you to do is to create one formative and one summative assessment. So about 2.5 minutes each. You're going to have to think fast, but I think we've got the basics down. You can pull this off. Okay, this time everybody move. You have to accept the invitation. As it turns out, Rez and I can see who's left in the waiting room who hasn't gone to the breakout room. So you're caught if you don't move. You ready? Go ahead, Rez, make the switch. See you back in 5. Rez, how's the room clearing out? Better than last time?
We still have 19 in here, so 17.
Get moving, everybody. We can see you. We're going to start calling out names. Helene, Yolanda, Steve, oh, all my pride's gone. Pamela, get moving. Pamela, Damon, I know all these people. CCI, is that Joe? Let's see, who else can we yell at? Call out by name here. There's no sympathy. Jennifer.
Damon is staying in here again.
Yeah. Indiana Wellness, is that you, Dana or Jason? Get moving there, you guys. Nick, down to 12. County Alley, get moving. Danny, still there. Some good input there, Rez, and everybody who's still listening.
Mm-hmm. Somebody asked me how to use break rooms, so I gave them that information. So that's
excellent. Good.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice. You're locked in. It's a little hard to move from one to the other, but that's the limitation of Zoom, having limited co-hosts.
Actually, no, you could change the settings to allow people to go back on their own.
Okay.
You can do that, but at the same time, if you do that, then people go in and out. So you're gonna kind of contain them in the room. But yeah, I thought I can put you in a room and then take you back out, but you really can't take individual people out. I can just move you to a different room. I could do that.
Oh, you could do that. Okay.
Right.
Oh wait, I'm afraid of screwing something up and getting locked out.
No worries.
my nightmare. We're doing well. We're down to the last half hour. We're doing great.
37 minutes left, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was hoping to be through with this by about 4:20, which is we're a little bit behind, I guess. We'll do attendance tracking.
The one thing is, if people for some reason leave and come back, of course you don't really know which room they were assigned to, so they might get assigned to a different room.
Okay.
The only way to do that, you can pre-assign rooms if you have the email sign up. So they use their email to log in and then join the Zoom with authentication. Then you could pre-assign them.
Okay.
And then they go to a specific room.
Good. Okay.
Marco is back. Marco, do you want me to did you get kicked out of the room?
Yeah.
Maybe which room were you in, Marco?
Oh, I was with Scott.
With Scott in business. I'll put it back in there. There you go.
Throw him back in. Thanks, Marco. Later.
Yeah. It's a pretty good, cool feature, I have to say.
Yep, it's fun.
Let me see.
it's a little bit lacking compared to, the only other one I'm familiar with is Adobe Connects, which is very robust. You can actually have separate chat boards and notepads in each, and then hit a button and have it all come together. You can see the notes from everybody's breakout in one place and their chat all in one place. You can assemble it instantly.
What I'd really like to have in Zoom is a place where you can post all the documents you want to share. So you don't have to. I'm not sure why they haven't done that yet. But.
Well, they might. They've got an upgrade to Zoom Webinar, I think, and that probably supports that kind of content.
Right, that's probably in the webinar. Have you ever looked at the webinar part?
I've not.
Compared to the meeting, because that's where you see only the presenters and not the participants. You don't really interact as much. I used to. Maybe that's similar to Adobe Connect.
Yeah, probably yes. They're all pretty competitive. How much time do we have left? Any idea?
1 minute and 30 seconds.
I plan to do the same thing again. We'll just go round robin. We'll start maybe with Scott and work our way the other way. Of course, I'm recording. Hello, everybody listening to the recording. It's going to have our chit chat, as well as all the names we called out of people who didn't leave the room. So they'll be on the web.
Okay, I'm sending them the 1 minute warning now.
All right. Public ACCET is not above public shaming.
There you go.
Okay, Scott says he's ready.
Scott is ready. We're going to give them another for a few seconds. Okay, about 30 seconds. Okay, bringing them back. Here we go.
Coming back. Good deal. I'll make this quick.
Good. Oh. And we're back.
In the back. Good. Hello, everybody. Why don't our moderators stay on screen? Everybody else can duck out. And I think everybody's back. The room is back up to over 100. That's great. So while you guys were gone and busy doing your homework, there were some people staying in the main room. We publicly shamed each of them, and some stayed anyway. So either they are not above being publicly shamed, or they were doing something else. But either way, caught. So let's do the same drill again, if you guys don't mind. Thanks for that. Let's go reverse order this time. Scott, how about kicking off with business administration? What did you guys do for formative and summative?
All right. As I was checking with the group, if I can read my handwriting, because I took my notes the old-fashioned way. So for formative, we had Excel terminology, like quizzes on Excel terminology. We had tests that asked students to show how to set up specific formulas. We had asking a question and seeing if who gets it right. So plop a question in a discussion board, and like you did to us with your who knows John the best and what authentication.
Which you all failed, by the way. Which you all failed, by the way.
Yeah, we did. So, and then for summative, we had things like doing a mail merge or setting up a template and having somebody complete a project, a spreadsheet with that. That was pretty much it.
Good, excellent. Maya, you want to take over for auto mechanics?
Sure. So we had picked an objective of describing the various classifications of engines. So for our formative, very similar ideas. We talked about discussion with different questioning techniques. We talked about a short 10-question quiz, an assignment on a single type of the engine, different labeling exercises, matching definition, type of engine, vocabulary, etc. And then when we were speaking about those larger summative assessments, we were doing a compare and contrast with different engine types, talked about video demonstrations, student presentations, having a written final exam on this one would make sense at the lower levels, might also be applicable. We talked again about practical application exams and where questions could be more so geared towards how would you troubleshoot a certain project or a certain problem. So that was quite applicable to what they would be doing in the shop going forward. And we talked about portfolios, capstones, course evaluations, as well.
It's interesting as the assessments become more falling into the summative side, they become more authentic using that definition. So that's kind of what you're looking for, I think, is that kind of that arc. Maya, are you next, or let's see what I missed? Mary Claire, you're next.
I'll defer to Courtney. She ran that one.
Okay, Courtney,
Okay.
yep, go.
So yeah, we started with just some examples of learning objectives and how we could make formative and summative assessments for each one. For the formative, we discussed kind of check-in questions in the discussion board, being able to see where students are at that moment. And then let me pull up my notes here. So if they're reading different scientific articles, then they might have to write, have little Quizlets or short concept checking questions on each one of those. And then a summative assessment would be a research project, which can be broken down into several formative assessments, simple proposals on each theory that they're learning, and then putting it all together into a larger project where they have to write a larger summary, maybe do their own research, something that's more weighted. The grade is more heavily weighted.
I like Courtney's, that idea that your group developed, Courtney and Mary Claire, of kind of, it's a summative assessment, but it's in pieces. So it's both, isn't it, over time? Students build on it over time. So project-based learning, which is a whole nother science, right? A lot of work, particularly for the course designer, for the instructor, but really valuable to students, is both authentic assessment and helping students along. And you can find out along the way where they're struggling, so they don't crash and burn when it comes to the capstone or to the big project. You don't want that to happen. You don't want to overwhelm, particularly our vocational students. Be sure that they're mastering these concepts along the way in formative assessments, and then they're pulling it together at the end. Christina, anything you guys want to share? Oop, you're muted.
Unmute.
There you go. You're good now.
Okay, there we go. All right, so for anatomy class, in the formative space, we talked about the typical things like a labeling activity. The members of the group mentioned that there's some great apps out there that you can use to do these labeling activities, so you don't actually need to be in the lab dissecting anything.
Never.
Talked about discussion forums and before and after quizzes. So do a before quiz, what do you know? Do the presentation of the anatomy in the different body and different parts in a particular area of the body. During the after quiz, matching exercises for medical terminology, things like that. And then in the summative space, we talked a lot about just group presentations and groups of students really working on one particular organ system or one area of the body and becoming the experts, and then presenting that to the rest of the class. So talking not only just about the presentation of the anatomy and the parts themselves, but what they do, how everything's connected, things like that.
Good, excellent. These are really good ideas. I know these are not new to most of you, but often I think we oversimplify formative and summative assessment, and formative starts meaning trivial, and summative starts meaning like high stakes, and that's not what they mean. Formative need not be trivial. It can be very high level blooms for formative. So take a look. I think that link, I'm going to go back over to the syllabus that we're working from today. There's nothing that this link right here to this, where'd it go? Yeah, this Yale article. It's actually, irrespective of coming out of Yale, it's a really good tool for teachers, but it gives some excellent examples of formative and summative assessments. Let's move on. We're going to talk about some real practical stuff, and then we're going to get back to some pedagogy here in a minute. We're down to the last half hour. We're pretty much on schedule. That's great. To talk about attendance tracking means talking about what IDL means, which is interactive distance learning. Okay, that means specifically three things. Let me find my, oops, where'd it go? My screen dropped. Come back. We're talking about three types of interaction with distance learning: student to student, student to content, and student to faculty. The student to content is easy. It's their homework. It's their watching the videos. It's reading their books. It's doing their assignments on their own. The student to faculty, when faculty members are facilitating, when they're listening to lectures or participating in those kinds of things. Student to student often happens in discussion forums. So it means lots of different types of interaction. For attendance taking, since there is no last day of attendance like last login, It means that students are keeping up with the work. You're tracking attendance not by hours attended or hours logged in, but by work completed. That's pretty important stuff, a very, very significant difference. I'm trying to find my chat board here, be sure I'm not missing anything. For some reason, it's not coming up, you guys. So you see it, there it is, just finally came back up. Okay, good. Common question, how do I track attendance in distance learning? Well, it's not time. Now, if you have a combination, if you're hybrid, then it's a combination. You're tracking attendance in a traditional way for the time students are on site, and you're tracking it by work completed for the online time. That means you're tracking work completed the same way we were talking about tracking it for a start or for last day of attendance. Gradable stuff, like Emily's saying, okay? And you're making sure they keep up. This overlaps very heavily with standard 8C, student assessment, satisfactory academic progress. You have to be tracking how your students are doing. If students are left alone all week and their work is all done on Sunday night or Monday morning or Friday night, whenever that is, what happens to a student who hasn't done anything all week? Are they in good shape or are they in tough shape? Type something in, whatever quip you have experience with this. It's bad shape, as Candace said. I say that right, bad shape. So your job is to ensure that students don't get behind. You've got to pace this out. That's where the term pacing and gating comes from. You'll see that by my mouse. Pacing means students are keeping up. You've spread this work out over the week. You cannot leave it for one night. Now, again, if you're a student at Yale, that may be different, okay? Maybe they're left alone for a couple weeks, who knows? But you're keeping a rate of pursuit. I like that term, Kat and John. They've got to be keeping up. Something needs to be happening every day. Otherwise, you're losing them. Gating means they can't fall too far behind or get too far ahead. This is not a self-study course. They're keeping up with their cohort, neither falling behind nor going too far ahead. Okay? Pacing and gating, rate of pursuit, good structure. If a student gets too far behind, what do you do? What do you do? How do they make it up if they missed a week of work? For a good reason or for a not so good a reason? What do you do? A learning plan? Help? Lots of help, Emily. An individual learning plan, can they make it up? How much work can a student make up? Now it depends how long your term is, right? Some of you may have, is anybody here where courses online are running, say in 4 weeks or so, 4 or 5 weeks? One-on-one tutoring, that works. 5 weeks, these are short, right? They miss a week, they're tanked, right? That's 20% of the course. If it's a 12-week course, you got more time to recover, don't you? So the shorter the length of this course, units, the more urgent it is that they don't fall behind, all right? And you've got to have some way to make them up or you're going to lose them all. So don't let them get too far behind. We call it setting the triggers very lightly. If a student's behind by a day or two, act then. A week is too late. Act then. And we talked about on Friday, there was some really good discussion and some differences. Some schools were having their faculty do the reach out. Others had a separate somebody from their academic department reach out to assist them. I'm not saying they can't miss a week, Ron. I'm just saying if it's a 4 or 5 week class and they've missed a week, they've missed 20%. How does someone make up 20% of the coursework and not fall further behind? I'm not going to answer that today because there are ways to do it, but you have to be very, very clear what happens, what the penalties are, the incentives for keeping up. Are there penalties if they're behind? You know, what constitutes late in an online environment? We're not talking about being 5 minutes late for class, we're talking about being late with their work. You know, how do you incentivize students to keep up? This all gets wrapped into how well you know your students, what kind of counseling and support you have, who's responsible for that. And something I talked about during the town hall a couple weeks ago, don't lay all this at your instructor's doorstep. They won't be able to handle it. They're not trained for it. Be sure you've got somebody on your team who has a direct relationship with these students, who can motivate them, knows them, can reach them, who the student will respond to. And John, there's some other good ideas where you are contributing to how students can keep up. In document on the attendance, document 35 is it? There's specific language about makeup work. It has to be the same scope, duration, method of delivery. So you have to keep an eye on that. Be sure that a student hasn't missed opportunities and he just hasn't been given some trivial reading assignment or video to watch that will not cut it. Yep, student services, thanks, John. Okay. So this section talks about attendance tracking in the context of pacing, gating, keeping up, makeup work. What do you do when the student falls behind? You've got to track this really well. Expect at the time of your on-site visit, virtual or otherwise, for the approval of your online program, that you're going to have to be able to prove this. Okay, be able to demonstrate exactly what happens when students fall behind. Questions on that? Okay. We're running about 10 minutes behind, but not too bad. How does late work impact attendance? I think that's a super good question, Kaylee. Does someone want to answer to that before I move on? I think that's a super good question. ACCET doesn't dictate that, by the way. It might delay their graduation. They might have to retake the module, which is easier when the terms are short. That's an advantage of shorter terms. You could cycle them right back. Does anybody penalize late work? 10%, something off the grade? Candace does, depends on the late policy. Be sure your late policies are laid out. By late, in this case, we mean late submission of work. Maybe the quiz is closed after the deadline, or they get a penalty for taking it late, or penalty for not participating in the discussion forum. Again, no one likes to, carrots are always better than sticks, but you gotta have some of both. Good questions. Any other questions before we move on? We're gonna move on to discussion forums next and talk a little bit about that, talk quite a bit about it. In fact, we spend the rest of this session on discussion forums. Okay. In the syllabus for today, there's a whole bunch of bullet points about best practices. Now, ACCET does not dictate all this. ACCET requirements are that there's student-to-student and student-to-faculty interaction. A lot of the student-to-student interaction takes place in discussion forums. That's the way a lot of schools do it. In a hybrid situation, you might not be doing discussion forums asynchronously. You might be doing them live in a regular class lecture discussion kind of format, which is totally fine. There's nothing that says in a hybrid format that you have to have discussion forums. You have to have some other kind of interaction, but it depends on the percentage of hybrid versus versus online. But some schools do all their discussions live, and they think of the flipped classroom concept, which was real popular about 5 years ago. I don't know if it's still a buzzword or not, but in a flipped classroom situation, the students are doing their prep work remotely, and they're doing their interactive student-to-student and their discussion forums in residence. But again, I wouldn't leave students on their own for a week without knowing how they're doing. Okay. Here's some bullet points. Open-ended questions are best. If the questions that are coming out of the prefab stuff from the publisher are trivial, they will die out quickly. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But just look at open-ended questions. What if scenarios, problem solving, critical thinking skills. What would you do if? Are the kinds of questions that typically have more legs in discussion forums. They're more interesting. Problem solving. Maya's group was talking about auto mechanics. How would you troubleshoot something? Those are great topics for discussion questions. Discussion forums should be a way to either kick stuff off or wrap things up or both. Okay, they're not drummed up out of the moment. The students have prepared for these. That takes discipline. It's hard for a lot of our students to do that. You want them to have done some prep work so they come to the discussion forum prepared, whether it's live or online, synchronous or asynchronous. They should come with some level of preparedness. Discussion questions in an asynchronous environment are typically open, quote unquote, for some period of time with a given start date and end date, back to pacing and gating. It's open at a particular time, it ends at a particular time. They can't go back later and throw something in and just copy somebody else's posting. They've done some work and it's supporting. If there's going to be a clinical tomorrow, maybe the discussion forum talks about the clinical and how to prepare for it. What would they do if this happens? What if they do if that happens? How long, I think Linda's asking, how long should a discussion forum be open? That depends. I'm not going to answer that question directly, but some other folks jump in there. Depends how often, what else the students are doing. Tim likes weekly. I always liked weekly, but it doesn't mean it's once a week. It means it's going on for that period and things are happening during that period. The next bullet talks about keeping forums moving along. They're never static. A discussion forum with one question can't go on for a week, can it? It gets answered. When it's answered correctly, it dies, doesn't it? So a discussion forum that's open for a period of time has to be facilitated. That's a term of art, moderated or facilitated with active instructor involvement. The lack of active instructor involvement is the single biggest weakness that I've seen when we're looking at distance learning programs on site. Faculty are either not facilitating actively or they don't know how to do it. They're saying good job to everybody, or they're saying that's correct or that's incorrect, or they're telling students to respond to each other. They're not adding anything relative to content or understanding. Teaching your faculty, your online faculty, to facilitate discussion questions is an art more than a science. Way more art than science. When it's done live, it's way more art than science. It's something that you should practice and run some in-service trainings on. There's lots of good articles in the what's the word I was looking for? I forgot the word. Check the research. You'll find lots of good references on facilitating discussion forums. Okay. Here were my prompts for interaction, but most schools rely on their discussion forums as evidence of student-to-student interactions. A Q&A is not student-to-student interaction. An FAQ is not student-to-student interaction. Interaction is structured. It means it's built into the syllabus. It's not by accident. Okay, keep that in mind. Interaction does not happen by accident in a distance learning format. It's structured in by the course designer, by the instructor, by the academic department heads. You have to be sure that that's happening. Why have discussion forums? There has to be a reason for it. Back to Bloom's, what are you trying to achieve? Back to your course mapping, what do the students have to learn? What do they have to understand by the end of the discussion question? Is it a formative assessment or is it summative? Who will summarize it when it's over with? How do you know the students learned what they learned? And based on that, any suggestions about how many people, how many students can be in a discussion forum, live or online? Would 100 students, 106 like we have here today, be a good number for discussion forums that are being graded? Anybody have thoughts about that? 106 students? Not really. DOE, whoever you are, who is DOE? Would you tell us who you are? Give us a name. No one's going to identify themselves. 15 they like, 106 is too many, not too many. 10 to 12. $15 to $20. Okay, I'm going to give you a number that I like, and then my number is 15. So I'm in with the 15 folks. 12 to 15 is a number I like. I find when the numbers get small that it's hard to keep up the energy. When you get over 15, the math doesn't work. Simple math problem. You've got 20 students in a class, and everybody's going to be posting multiple times, and the instructor moderating that. What do you have after several days? I'll spell it for you. It's a four-letter word, but it's not a vulgar word. That's my chaos is another way of doing it. That's 5 letters, though, I think. You've got a mess. You've got a chaos, okay? You've got students that are parroting each other's answers. You've got an instructor who can't possibly keep up. And that for the students, they sing 60, 80, 100 messages. They're not learning a darn thing, okay? If you have larger class sizes, I'm not saying you can't have 25 in a class, but most of the good LMSs will allow you to break up that class like we did today, live or asynchronous, into discussion groups. Do it. Break it up into groups of 12, 10 to 12 students, 15 at the most. This is a suggestion, not an ACCET requirement. ACCET teams would look at it and go, hey, 25. Looking pretty good. You must have a very talented person because we like what we see. I've never seen that happen, but just so you know, there's nothing that says you can't. You can have a very small group that's being facilitated terribly. same weakness applies. Is the instructor facilitating it? Are they able to? And is something meaningful going on? Is the objective of the lesson being met by the discussion forum? I like Mary Claire's comment. Take a look at what she said. Again, I'm going to suggest a best practice of 12 to 15 students in a discussion forum, even if you have to break the class up into smaller pieces. You're going to be grading students on this, not necessarily always, but mostly. It's structured interaction. Students have to participate. There's some kind of a grade that goes with it, even if it's a pass-fail. Anybody here with associate degree programs? Any OAD programs in the audience? We've got Linda, HMC, 3, 4, 5. In the time that a student's with you in an associate degree program, typical length of time, 1, 2 years? How long are your programs from the time the student begins to the time they end? 18 months, 20 months. So here's a theoretical question for you. A student in an introductory course, is the expectation for their participation in a discussion forum different when it reaches their capstone course? And if so, what would be the difference? Would you expect a student in an introductory course in a discussion forum to have the same expectations as someone at the end? Look at Bloom's, back to Bloom's, okay? You're in an associate degree program. This is pretty important stuff. Associate degree program. Students are supposed to be able to do research, critical thinking. That's part of the reason for an associate degree program. They're doing something they couldn't do in the diploma program. One of those things is to be able to do research and think critically. They should be able to write. Their grammar should have been improved. Their social skills should be improved. They're ready for the job market. Now, this is not exclusive to associate degree programs, but they tend to be longer. If you're in a 9 or 12-month program, anything over a month or two, you should expect to see improvement. Is that improvement part of a course competency or part of a program competency? Chaim, I would agree with you. Thank you, Rabbi. Both, okay? The program competency is kind of the answer I was looking for, but Danny, you're correct. You should see improvement along the way within the course. But as a program outcome, you are building this, right? You're building the competencies over the time they're with you. A student who starts with you has a different skill set than the student's been with you for 9 or 12 or 18 months. You should expect by that point in time that their grammar and writing skills have improved, that their critical thinking skills have improved, that they understand the reason for discussion forum, for their essay exams, all those things. So your faculty need to be working together. Even if you're on a wheel kind of curriculum, your faculty have to have higher expectations for the students in higher level courses. That's a given. Your students can handle it. And if you're not doing it, you're going to be boring them silly and they won't be ready for the job market. Okay, so when you look at Bloom's, you look at your program level mapping, your discussion forums should be growing along with your students, not static. Okay, here we go. In this exercise, we're going to take about 8 minutes for this, okay? A little longer than before. We're going to go over time. Somebody has to leave at 5. We understand you're not being graded on how long you stay today. We're going to carry this on for this exercise and do a refresher afterwards, okay? So for about 8 minutes, I'd like you to pretend that these courses are 6-month courses. I'd like you to create a discussion question appropriate for a student who's halfway through the program, okay? Halfway through a 6-month program, I'd like your discussion question that you're going to create now in a group to be appropriate for those students and to create a rubric for that discussion forum, not one that's necessarily the same rubric for the entire institution, for the entire program. A rubric that's appropriate for this halfway through discussion question. It's right in the middle of the program. Am I kind of clear? If I am, ready, set, 8 minutes, go. For those of you who are still in the rain room, there's a bunch of you. get moving. I'm going to start doing the public shaming again. Be sure you've accepted the invitation to go into your breakout if you came in late. Be sure you've accepted that. I'll be back in a minute.
We're 3 minutes and 20 seconds.
Great, thanks, Russ. Great.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we successfully cleared out most of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Although somebody was busy because they were sharing their screen by accident. We won't name any names. Yes, we're not above public shaming, everybody, as you can tell. Yep. Rez, as we come back from this group, again, for those listening, it's okay, there's no secrets. Would you mind reposting everything in the handouts, please?
Sure, I have it ready here.
Great. I'll save a lot of emails.
Mm.
We are running about 10 minutes over, but that's way better than I thought it was going to be, so I'm pretty happy about that.
2 minutes.
Are you able to give a 2-minute warning, or is it limited to minutes?
I can give him any kind of warning. I can say 2 minutes.
Yeah, give him a 2-minute warning. Thanks.
There you go.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Last call. All right. I keep forgetting who we assigned to what course, so I don't know what to call on. Find my cheat sheet here. There we go.
Anatomy. Christina, anatomy.
So let's start with Mary Claire and Courtney start this time. We'll do them first, then do Maya second.
There's psychology.
Third. Yep. Good.
Got it. 1 minute. We're going to bring that back in about a few seconds here. See if they're ready. Here we go.
Sure. We're out of
Wow.
Oh, here we go. Back to the big
There you
group.
go. You're back. Moderators online, everybody else can hide themselves. Welcome back. Thank you guys for coming back. 8 long minutes. Let's see how we're doing here. The room's all closed. We lost a few people along the line, but we're after 5 o'clock, so I understand that. Before I ask you guys to do a little sharing, I want to go over a couple little things first. On Friday, I think our guest speakers, with Maya's direction, were reminding everybody how faculty needed to be supervised, oriented. That's doubly true online. It's triply true. Your faculty have to be trained well, monitored and supervised, and then trained, monitored, and supervised again. You are looking for superstars. If you have mediocre faculty teaching online, you are not going to do well with your retention. You will not get the outcomes you expect. I can't emphasize that enough. You are looking to hire and retain superstar faculty. Develop them. If you can't develop them, go looking again. Do not settle for mediocre faculty in your online environment. It is a death wish for your school. It's the one place where you have to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Ruthless is a little too strong, but you've got to be committed to only hiring and retaining faculty who can do this really, really well for you. Otherwise, you will have major dropout issues. That's from a lot of experience in hundreds of site visits. So take that to mind. Abrupt, thank you, Val-Marie. It was direct, yes. Okay, with that in mind, let's go around. In fact, let's start with, who got to go last before they can go first this time? Let's start with Courtney and Mary Claire. Really quickly, what's your question you came up with? And just really quickly, how are you going to grade it?
In Chapter 5, the topic of isolation was covered and how it affects a person's well-being. So we're psychology.
Okay, still isolation. Okay.
What are the symptoms of what are the symptoms of isolation, and how does it manifest itself mentally, physically? How can a person mitigate the symptoms? And then our rubric was, our criteria were relevant to the topic, demonstrates current research, properly identifies all issues, and follows the discussion board instructions with substantive responses. And then we said, we kind of got cut off at this point, but then it was like needs improvement at expected level, or exceeds the level. So we kind of go in that direction.
So that's really
And
high
Courtney?
level stuff. Go, Courtney, you want to add to that? Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah.
No, that covered it. Yeah, we had the different pieces as part of the question, and then the different pieces also on the rubric as well, with different columns corresponding to how much the student answered related to that component of the question.
So I'm going to just comment on that because I think it's a dynamite question, obviously, for psychology course students who are more advanced. I think as an initial question, it's going to be way too complicated. I think that's a series of questions over a week. Think of that as pieces. Otherwise, it's an essay, right? They're writing an essay to do that well. So what you want to do is have this develop over time. You start with a piece of it and you build that as the week goes on. So one of the tricks to this is that you don't wait for every student to answer the first piece of the question. As a couple students have answered and are on the right track, the instructor comes in and says, "Good work, Courtney. That's exactly what we meant by this. And now I'd like the rest of you to comment on this piece of this question." So by the time this thing is all been developed, you have the equivalent of an essay that everybody's contributed to. That's the important part. I think faculty stay back and wait till everybody's answered the first piece. They start parroting each other pretty quickly, and then there's no further development. You have to ask students to build on what happened before. And I call that a discussion question turn. As the question develops, it's turned by the moderator, by the facilitator, into something more complex to help it, again, to achieve the objectives of the lesson. That was a great question. Maya, you want to go next?
Sure. We actually had quite a bit of discussion around the questions. And so a lot, like we were saying, a lot was based upon those being open-ended. Something like a customer comes in complaining of blah. They think the problem is why, what could be wrong with the engine, what else could be problematic. Explain how you would do so given the steps that we've learned based upon a reading of chapters 4 to 7 or whatever it may be. So a lot of different case-based scenarios where they could show they're learning from their reading, but then also how it would be implicated in a real life scenario. And then we didn't get as much time to talk about the rubric because wanted to make sure everybody could participate. Again, make sure everybody was recognized, feeling part of the community of repliers.
Good job,
but we
facilitator.
did. There you go. But not time manager. But then we did talk about on our rubric, making sure that you're not just grading that initial response, but making sure the expectations were really clear as well for when your student is replying to another's post, and making sure they know how that's going to be graded and that that is of equal weight or not to their initial answer.
John's complaining that his flat tire discussion didn't make it into your comments, but John gets due credit for his flat tire discussion. Thank you, John. You are publicly acknowledged for that. Thanks for that. Good job, Maya. Thanks. I think you will never go wrong with case studies. I think it's a good safe spot. I think most of your faculty new to this can handle that. Often your textbooks and instructor materials have those for you. They're a great starting point, and you can take those a long way. I think they're a prescription for success. Scott, you want to go next?
Sure. So we had a lot of good discussion on the questions first, and we kind of put them in the chat. So there are questions based on steps involved in a process, like what steps would you do to create a pivot chart or a graph or something like that. There was also questions on taking formulas and how many problems can you create with these formulas. And we kind of settled on the process one, which was steps in the process to create a pivot table. then we talked about the rubric, and we look at, the various levels, what is acceptable, what is exceeding, and what is not exceeding in the case of the steps of the pivot chart. Obviously, you're not going to create a whole sophisticated rubric in the time constraints that we had, but we did talk about at least kind of those three separate things: what meets, what exceeds, and what is not acceptable work for the discussion. We also had a side discussion that was pretty interesting on for grading the discussion forum, not just on the actual content, but also on the participation. So how many words do you have to contribute? Do you have to answer or respond to students? Are those built into the rubric? How many responses? And are the responses not just something like, hey, great work, John, but actually have a substantive response to something else that a student said? So it was a pretty good discussion.
Excellent. What I like so far, everybody's moved up the level. I really appreciate how all the groups have moved this up several notches from an entry-level kind of question. So good job again for the business admin folks. Christina, how about your group?
All right, last but not least, the anatomy class. Our question was, discuss the effects of vasoconstriction and vasodilation on distribution of blood and oxygen to areas of the body. So this was kind of technical, and we did put it in the chat if anybody wants to take a quick look at it. So that's our open-ended question, prompting the discussion. In terms of the rubric, we identified several areas that would be graded. One would be appropriate use of vocabulary, so anatomical and physiological vocabulary. And then, of course, when discussing the process, making sure that the steps in the process were in the correct order, so sequencing. Students would also be graded on their understanding of physiology and the pathology of that process. And then, of course, what happens downstream. So I don't know, I'm not anatomy or physiology expert. I got very technical very quickly. So what happens downstream, we'll keep it there for my layman's terms. Of course, providing relevant examples. And then students would also be graded on justifying their response and providing references to other sources. So that would be inherently including the conversational element of the discussion. So conversations between students and the teacher. We also discussed students being graded for correct grammar and syntax in their response as well. And then, of course, for providing authentic responses, so no copying and pasting, no plagiarism, etc.
So you guys hit on some of the etiquette, which Courtney wants to address here real briefly. But what I think you've all done with this example, the anatomy class, is a really good example of a what-if scenario. Again, along with case studies, what-if scenarios are perfect fodder for discussion forums. They really are open-ended, and they get students thinking, and they tend to be a lot of fun. It's like putting together a puzzle. I think that's a really good one. The other things that several of you alluded to in your rubrics, you're laying out the skill sets that you expect students to have. And again, those may change over time, but in order to participate successfully, you're going to need to do some things that are probably hard. Students will have to learn how to do those things. Keep that in mind as you start with your introductory courses. Your faculty teaching your introductory courses are, when I talked about superheroes, that's where your superheroes belong in the introductory courses, not necessarily the advanced courses. The introductory courses need those superstar faculty who will nurture them and help them with these skill sets. Courtney, would you talk a little bit about the etiquette of online? I think it's so important.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on really quickly just the importance of establishing a standard for online etiquette, especially if it's a student's first time taking an online class. Kind of like what Christina's group talked about the grammar and spelling. Make sure students know the standard for how they're supposed to be interacting with each other, the kind of language they're supposed to be using, and how they're presenting it. And that's important to establish at the beginning.
Should you expect, Courtney, in your experience, students to use good grammar in discussion? Does that have to be formal? What kind of language do you find?
I find that if you don't establish a very clear expectation, then you do get a lot of sort of text like cell phone type language, and that's not what you want if it's an academic assignment.
So you want to keep it a little bit more formal.
It depends on the class, but I personally, I appreciate proper grammar and spelling and all that. It's just very, you know, as long as it meets the objectives of your class and you're getting students to participate in the way that you model that you expect.
By expecting students to be professional in an online forum, would that be considered an authentic assessment by any chance?
It could be a part of it.
Because so yeah, you want to model what you want them to be able to do on the job. There's no point in being super casual in discussion forum. I don't mean so formal that students are afraid. Being casual is okay, but being unprofessional is not okay. So you have to expect that in online. That's great, Courtney. Thanks very much for sharing that. Good. I'm going to go back and do a screen share. We're going to wrap up here. I know we're 20 minutes over, 15 minutes over, but we're going to go back to the screen share one more time and wrap up. At this point, I think everybody's done a great job, but we covered a whole lot of material. Any one of these topics, of course, could have been a full webinar, a full day, or a full workshop all by itself. We really want to be sure that we all had a common vocabulary, get some idea of the expectations that ACCET teams will expect to see when they do your on-site visit, both for your initial approval for distance learning and later visits as a distance learning school. These are the expectations that teams typically have. So we've set you up, I think, the best for that. We talked a lot about training and monitoring faculty, so put that at the top of your list among all the other things that are at the top of your list today. Looking ahead very briefly, on Friday, this Friday at 3:30 Eastern Time, there is the link. Again, Rez has posted this a couple times. If you didn't get the handouts, if you can't find them in the chat board, just email us. We'll send you a PDF of these documents. This is the link to the webinar for Friday. It's a different link. Again, you can share it with your team. Anybody can come that wants to. We're going to tediously, carefully, methodically, and slowly walk through the application. And we'll recap a lot of these little skill sets we've talked about the last couple of weeks during that time. With that, we're about through. We've got some time for questions. Thank you for that we're able to hang with us. Most everybody did. I still see some questions being posted. Anybody is welcome to answer those questions in the chat board. But thank you all for coming. If you got any feedback for us, drop it into the chat board as well, or send it to us via email. We really appreciate your taking the time. Hopefully, again, you're in your state, in your city, that things are going to be settling down soon with COVID, and you'll be getting some good news like we've been getting here in Michigan lately, and that things will start getting back to normal for you. With that, I'm going to formally end it, but again, we're online here. Rez, you can kill the recording if you'd like to. Thanks for doing that and being our facilitator for today. And everybody have a good day, and hope your week's going well for you. Thanks.